The massive lecture hall at the Galactic Academy fell silent as Professor Veltar's 8 tentacles curled around his data pad. Students from dozens of different worlds sat in curved rows, their various breathing apparatus and environmental suits creating a symphony of mechanical sounds. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate oxygen breathers, methane processors, and silicon-based life forms all in one space. Your final examination, the professor began, his translator device crackling slightly, will determine whether you graduate as certified xenobiologists or return to your homeworlds as failures. Jake Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his specially modified chair, designed for human anatomy among the alien seating. He was the only human in the advanced program, having earned a spot through a controversial exchange agreement between Earth and the Galactic Academy. Most days, he felt like a pet project rather than a serious student. The holographic display activated above the professor's head, showing a barren planet with twisted metal structures jutting from blood-red soil. Several students gasped, recognizing the distinctive devastation patterns. Kepler, 442c. Professor Veltar continued, his voice carrying the weight of academic authority. Home to the creature known as the Void Stalker. In the past 50 galactic standard years, this predator has been responsible for the complete evacuation of 3 separate civilizations. The Helix Colony, population 2 million, abandoned overnight. New Carthage, a mining operation with 15,000 workers, found empty with all equipment destroyed. Most recently, the research outpost on Kepler's northern continent was discovered with no survivors and structures that appear to have been torn apart from the inside. Jake raised his hand tentatively. The gesture looked primitive among his classmates, who communicated through color changes, electromagnetic pulses, or chemical releases. Yes, Human Thompson? The professor's tone suggested mild irritation. What happened to the people? Were their bodies found? Several students turned to look at Jake with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed disgust. The HFY warriors, tall insectoid beings with natural armor plating, clicked their mandibles in what Jake had learned was their equivalent of laughter. No bodies have ever been recovered. Professor Veltar replied, the creature appears to consume its prey entirely, leaving only destruction in its wake. Which brings us to your assignment. The holographic display shifted to show detailed planetary scans and atmospheric readings. Jake studied the data, while his classmates accessed it through their various technological implants and biological interfaces. He was probably the only student who had actually read the information with his eyes. Teams of 3 will observe and catalog this creature's behavior patterns, feeding habits, and territorial markers. This is strictly an observational mission. You are not to engage with the subject under any circumstances. Jake noticed how the professor emphasized the word observational while looking directly at him. Humans had developed something of a reputation in the galaxy for their tendency to approach dangerous situations with what other species considered reckless abandon. Grixtau, the lead HFY student and acknowledged top of their class, raised one of his 4 arms. His exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights, and his compound eyes reflected rainbow patterns. Professor, what level of armament will be authorized for this mission? Standard defensive equipment only. Energy barriers, emergency beacons, and basic medical supplies. Remember, this creature has defeated military forces from 3 different species. Your technology will not save you if you're detected. The class began forming into teams immediately. Jake watched as the natural hierarchies established themselves. The HFY warriors gravitated toward each other, their military training creating instant bonds. The Zephyrians, crystalline beings whose thought processes operated faster than most organic computers, formed intellectual partnerships through rapid data exchanges. The Throx students, heavily armored turtle-like beings known for their methodical approach to problem-solving, selected teammates based on complementary skill sets. Jake remained seated as a room filled with various forms of communication. Nobody approached him. After several minutes, Professor Veltar's tentacles tapped impatiently against his podium. Thompson, you'll be paired with Quillax and Stoneheart. Jake looked around until he spotted his assigned teammates. Quillax was a young Zephyrian whose crystalline structure seemed dimmer than his peers, suggesting he was among the slower thinkers of his species. Stoneheart was a small Throck whose shell showed several stress fractures, indicating either poor health or recent academic failures. Wonderful, Grixtal muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. The primitive gets the rejects. Jake stood up, his height putting him at average level with most of his classmates despite humans being considered a smaller species. He walked over to his new team members, noting how other students moved slightly away from him as he passed. Even after 2 years at the academy, he still made most aliens uncomfortable. "I'm Jake," he said simply, extending his hand in a human greeting gesture. Quillax's crystalline form shifted colors rapidly, his translator struggling to convert his high-speed thoughts into standard galactic. "I am pleased to work with. The human perspective may prove interesting." Stoneheart's voice emerged from somewhere deep within his shell, barely audible. "I have studied human behavioral patterns. Your species shows unusual problem-solving approaches." "That's one way to put it," Jake replied, checking his basic field kit. Unlike his classmates who carried advanced scanning equipment, quantum computers, and military-grade protective gear, Jake's supplies consisted of standard survival items that would have been familiar to any human explorer from centuries past. As the teams received their final briefings and equipment assignments, Jake noticed something his classmates seemed to have missed. Every report about the Void Stalker mentioned the same detail. Complete destruction but no bodies. That wasn't the pattern of a mindless predator. That was something else entirely. The transport shuttle touched down on Kepler, 442C's rust-colored surface with a mechanical thud that echoed across the barren landscape. Jake pressed his face to the small porthole, watching alien winds whip dust devils across the broken terrain. Scattered chunks of twisted metal dotted the horizon, like the bones of some massive creature, remnants of the civilizations that once called this place home. "Remember, stay with your assigned teams." Professor Veltar's voice crackled through the communication system. "Maintain constant contact with the orbital station. At the first sign of the creature, activate your emergency beacons and return to the extraction point immediately." The 12 students gathered their equipment and filed out of the shuttle. Jake shouldered a simple backpack while his teammates, Quillax and Stoneheart, struggled with their complex scanning devices and protective gear. Around them, the other teams spread out across the landing zone, their advanced technology humming with power. Grixtal's team moved with military precision, their plasma weapons charged and ready. The lead HFY warrior had insisted on bringing enough firepower to level a small city, despite the professor's orders about defensive equipment only. His teammates flanked him in perfect formation, their compound eyes scanning for threats. "Primitive humans," Grixtal muttered as he passed Jake's group. "This creature has destroyed entire armies. What do you think your species' simple tools will accomplish here?" Jake checked his basic scanner, a device that would have been considered ancient by galactic standards. Sometimes simple works better than complicated. The Zephyrian teams had already activated their quantum sensors, filling the air with high-pitched electronic whines. Their crystalline bodies pulsed with data streams as they processed atmospheric readings, soil samples, and electromagnetic signatures. To them, understanding the creature meant breaking down its existence into pure mathematics. Stoneheart's shell retracted slightly as he powered up his geological scanner. "The terrain shows massive disruption patterns," he reported in his quiet voice. "Whatever created this damage possessed incredible strength." The first 2 hours passed peacefully. Teams spread across the desolate landscape, following predetermined search patterns. Jake found himself genuinely impressed by his classmates' professionalism. The HFY maintained perfect tactical formations while advancing through the ruins. The Zephyrians processed data faster than any organic computer. The Throck students methodically cataloged every piece of evidence they encountered. Jake's team took a different approach. Instead of relying on scanners and sensors, he studied the physical evidence with his own eyes. The twisted metal structures weren't randomly destroyed. The damage pattern suggested something had systematically dismantled the buildings, almost like it was searching for something specific. "Quillax," Jake said, pointing to a collapsed structure. "Does your scanner show any organic residue in there?" The young Zephyrian's crystalline form flickered as he processed the question. "Negative. No trace of biological matter detected anywhere in the ruins." That confirmed Jake's growing suspicion. A predator that completely consumed its prey would leave some trace behind. Blood, bone fragments, something. The complete absence of organic material suggested either perfect efficiency or something else entirely. The attack came without warning. One moment, Grickstow's team was advancing through a cluster of metal debris. The next, their emergency beacons were screaming across all communication channels. Jake looked up from his examination of claw marks to see something impossible emerging from what looked like solid rock. The Void Stalker defied every attempt at description. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its form shifting between solid matter and pure shadow. When it moved, reality bent around it like heated metal. The creature appeared massive 1 second, then seemed to fold into itself and become something completely different the next. Grickstow's plasma weapons fired uselessly as the creature phased through their energy barriers like they were made of air. The powerful blast that should have vaporized solid rock passed harmlessly through the beast's shifting form. Within seconds, the perfectly disciplined Kethvar formation collapsed into chaos. Emergency extraction. Grickstow's voice cut through the static. All teams returned to landing zone immediately, but the creature was already moving to its next target. The Zephyrian teams found their quantum sensors completely useless. The beast existed partially outside normal space-time, making it impossible to track or predict. Their advanced mathematics meant nothing when faced with something that ignored the basic laws of physics. Jake watched one of the crystalline students simply vanish as the creature passed through his position. No violence, no struggle, just there one moment and gone the next. The remaining Zephyrians scattered, their usual logical thinking replaced by primal terror. The Throx students lasted longest, their natural armor and methodical nature serving them well initially, but their heavy shells became liabilities when facing something that could reach through dimensions. Stoneheart's scanner registered massive gravitational distortions as the creature approached their position. Jake. Stoneheart's voice was barely a whisper. My sensors are detecting spatial tears. This thing isn't just moving through our dimension. It's creating holes in reality itself. Communication channels filled with panic voices as teams call for immediate evacuation. The creature seemed to be everywhere at once, striking from impossible angles. Jake watched shuttle after shuttle liftoff, carrying traumatized students back to the orbital station. Where's Team 7? Professor Veltar's voice cut through the chaos. Thompson's group went toward the canyon system. Someone reported. Lost contact 20 minutes ago. Jake heard his name being called over the communication system, but he was too focused on what he was seeing to respond. The Void Stalker had stopped its attacks and was moving in a specific pattern across the landscape. It wasn't hunting randomly. It was searching for something. Jake, we need to go. Quillax's translator struggled to keep up with his rapid, panicked thoughts. The evacuation shuttles are leaving, but Jake was watching the creature's behavior, noting how it paused at certain locations, how it seemed to be following some kind of trail. This wasn't the mindless predator described in the reports. This was something lost, something desperate. His emergency beacon had been damaged during the initial chaos, its signal cutting out completely. From the orbital station's perspective, Jake Thompson and his team had simply vanished into the same void that had claimed 6 other students. The last evacuation shuttle disappeared into the alien sky, leaving behind only empty ruins and the impossible creature that continued its strange, searching dance across the barren landscape. As official records would later state, Jake Thompson was presumed dead, another victim of the unstoppable Void Stalker. But Jake was very much alive, watching from his hiding spot as the creature displayed behavior that would change everything he thought he knew about first contact protocols. The research station's duty officer was halfway through his morning coffee when the impossible happened. Lieutenant Commander Hayes nearly choked on his drink as the outer airlock sensors detected an incoming signal. According to the computers, Jake Thompson was requesting entry to the station. Jake Thompson, who had been declared dead 3 days ago. Computer, run a full diagnostic on airlock sensors, Hayes commanded, his hands shaking as he set down his cup. All systems functioning within normal parameters. The artificial intelligence responded in its maddeningly calm tone. Hayes leaned forward in his chair, squinting at the security feed from the outer airlock camera. There, clear as daylight, stood Jake Thompson. The human student looked tired, and his clothes were dirty, but he was very much alive. He was also making gestures towards something just outside the camera's range. This is Control to approaching individual. Identify yourself immediately. Jake's voice crackled through the communication system. Hey there, Control. Jake Thompson requesting permission to come aboard. I've got a friend with me, so you might want to clear the docking bay. Hayes felt his stomach drop. Friend? The only thing on that planet was the creature that had killed 6 students and traumatized the survivors. His finger hovered over the emergency lockdown button. Thompson, you're listed as missing, presumed dead. What's your current status? Well, I'm definitely not dead, Jake replied cheerfully. Look, I know this is going to sound weird, but I need you to stay calm when I come through that airlock. My friend here gets nervous around loud noises. Before Hayes could respond, Jake had already initiated the entry sequence. The outer airlock door slid open, and Hayes watched in growing horror as Jake stepped inside. Behind him, something else entered the chamber. The security cameras struggled to focus on the second figure. The image kept shifting and distorting, like trying to film something through water. Hayes could make out what might have been a massive shape, easily twice Jake's height, but the details refused to resolve properly. Computer, identify the secondary individual in airlock 7. Hayes commanded, unable to comply. Sensors detect significant spatial distortion. Classification unknown. The inner airlock door began to open. Hayes slammed his fist on the emergency alert button, and suddenly every alarm in the station began screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors as the automated defense systems activated. Emergency lockdown initiated. The computer announced in 17 different languages, accommodating the diverse crew aboard the research station. All personnel report to designated safe rooms immediately. This is not a drill. Jake stepped through the inner airlock door into the main corridor, and Hayes got his first clear look at what followed him. His mind simply refused to process what he was seeing. The creature seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Parts of it appeared solid, while other sections flickered in and out of reality. It was simultaneously massive and compact, dark and luminous, terrifying and somehow oddly graceful. "Oh, come on," Jake said, looking around the flashing emergency lights with mild annoyance. This is exactly the kind of overreaction that makes first contact situations so complicated. He turned toward the creature and reached up to scratch behind what Hayes could only describe as appendages that shouldn't exist in normal space-time. "Don't mind all the noise, Whiskers. They're just excited to meet you." Whiskers. Jake had named the most feared predator in 3 star systems Whiskers. The creature's form seemed to relax at Jake's touch. The spatial distortions around it diminished, and its shape became more stable. When Jake gestured downward with his hand, the impossible beast actually sat down, its reality-warping geometry folding into something that almost resembled a very large, very strange dog. Professor Veltar arrived in the observation deck above the main corridor, his 8 tentacles rigid with shock. Through the reinforced windows, he stared at a sight that violated everything he understood about xenobiology. The creature that had forced the evacuation of 3 civilizations was wearing Jake's emergency beacon around what could generously be called a neck, like some kind of improvised collar. "Impossible," Veltar whispered, his translator barely catching the word. The report said it was a mindless killing machine. Grixtal burst through the observation deck doors, his carapace still bearing scars from his narrow escape 3 days earlier. The proud HFY warrior had spent the past 72 hours reviewing tactical manuals, trying to understand how his superior training and equipment had failed so completely. "That thing nearly killed half our class," Grixtal said, his compound eyes fixed on the scene below. "It tore through our energy barriers like they were paper. It ignored our plasma weapons completely." Jake seemed to sense he was being watched. He looked up toward the observation windows and waved casually, as if he hadn't just walked into a military research station with a reality-warping predator as a companion. He was just scared and lost. Jake called out, his voice carrying clearly through the station's communication system. "Turns out dimensional displacement really messes with a creature's sense of direction. Kind of like how humans get disoriented in space travel, except worse because his entire home dimension got cut off. Whiskers made a sound that could only be described as a purr, though it seemed to come from several dimensions at once. The creature nuzzled against Jake's shoulder with something that might have been affection. Security teams began arriving from all directions, their weapons drawn, but clearly uncertain about how to proceed. How do you contain something that can phase through solid matter? How do you fight something that exists partially outside normal reality? Stand down. Professor Veltar commanded through the intercom system. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage the entities in Corridor 7. Jake scratched behind Whisker's dimensional appendages again, and the creature's floor became even more stable. The emergency alarm continued blaring, but Jake seemed completely unbothered by the chaos his arrival had created. You know, Jake said conversationally to the security team surrounding him, if everyone could maybe stop pointing weapons at my friend here, I'd be happy to explain what actually happened down there. Whiskers doesn't like sudden movements, and you really don't want to see him when he gets startled. As if to demonstrate the point, one of the security officers accidentally activated his weapon's targeting laser. The red beam swept across Whisker's form, and suddenly the creature's stable appearance began to shift and warp. The spatial distortions returned, and for a moment, everyone in the corridor got a glimpse of the terrifying predator that had haunted 3 star systems. Easy, boy, Jake said calmly, not showing even a hint of fear. They're not threatening us. Just a misunderstanding. Whiskers settled down immediately, his form returning to a more docile configuration. The security officer quickly deactivated his weapon, his hands shaking as he realized how close they had all come to disaster. The conference room aboard the research station had never seen so many experts crammed into one space. Xenobiologists, military tacticians, dimensional physicists, and behavioral specialists from across the galaxy had arrived within hours of Jake's impossible return. They sat in specially designed chairs that accommodated everything from crystalline Zephyrian forms to the massive bulk of Throck elders. Jake sat at the center of it all, looking remarkably calm for someone who had supposedly died 3 days ago. Whiskers had positioned himself outside the conference room, his reality-warping form somehow managing to curl up in the corridor like an enormous, interdimensional cat. Every few minutes, part of the creature would phase through the wall to check on Jake, causing several experts to jump in their seats. Dr. Veltar activated his recording devices, his tentacles moving in complex patterns as he prepared to document what might be the most important xenobiological interview in galactic history. Let's start from the beginning, Mr. Thompson. When the evacuation shuttles left, you were presumed dead. What actually happened? Jake shifted in his chair, glancing toward the wall where Whiskers had last appeared. Well, my emergency beacon got damaged during the initial chaos. I was separated from my teammates when everyone started running. Instead of trying to reach the extraction point, I decided to observe the creature's behavior patterns. A collective gasp went around the room. Admiral Corvex, a veteran Kethvar military commander, leaned forward in disbelief. You stayed behind voluntarily? That creature had just devastated 4 separate teams. That's exactly why I stayed, Jake replied. See, I was watching how it moved, how it attacked. It wasn't random violence. The creature was following specific patterns, like it was searching for something. That's not predator behavior. That's displacement anxiety. Dr. Zena, the station's chief xenopsychologist, made rapid notes on her data pad. Displacement anxiety? Can you elaborate on that term? Jake nodded, warming to his subject. It's common in Earth animals when they're removed from their natural habitat. They become aggressive not because they're naturally violent, but because they're confused and trying to find familiar territory. I've seen it in everything from dogs to dolphins. The room buzzed with translated conversations as various species processed this information through their different communication methods. The idea that the galaxy's most feared predator might simply be a lost animal had never occurred to anyone. Your classmates deployed advanced quantum sensors, Professor Veltar noted, reviewing his data files. The Kethvar teams brought military-grade plasma weapons. The Zephyrians use theoretical xenobiology models that can process millions of variables simultaneously. You approach this creature with emergency rations and a thermal blanket. Jake shrugged. as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Technology doesn't solve everything. Sometimes a simple approach works better. Grickstow's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. Simple approach? That thing phased through our energy barriers like they didn't exist. It ignored plasma fire that could vaporize a starship. How does food and a blanket accomplish what military weapons couldn't? Because weapons make everything feel like a threat, Jake explained patiently. I watched the creature for hours before I made contact. It was obviously distressed. The dimensional phasing wasn't an attack technique. It was panic behavior. The creature kept shifting between dimensions because it was trying to escape, not hunt. He paused, remembering those first terrifying moments when he'd made his decision to approach instead of flee. The keening sounds it made weren't battle cries. They were distress calls. Classic signs of a lost animal trying to call for help. Dr. Zena's crystalline form pulse with rapid data processing. You're suggesting that what we interpreted as aggressive behavior was actually a cry for assistance? Exactly. So instead of trying to fight it or study it from a distance, I did what any animal handler would do. I made myself non-threatening. I sat down, kept my movements slow and predictable, and waited for it to approach me. The room fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems and the occasional reality distortion, as Whiskers shifted position outside. The implications of what Jake was describing challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about first contact protocols. And it just approached you? Admiral Corvex asked, his warrior training struggling to accept such a simple solution. Jake smiled, remembering that first moment of contact. Not immediately. It took about 6 hours of me just sitting there, occasionally offering food from my emergency kit. The creature would phase in and out of our dimension, getting a little closer each time. Eventually, it got curious about the thermal blanket. The thermal blanket? Professor Veltar's translator struggled with the concept. It was cold, Jake said simply. Dimensional displacement apparently interferes with a creature's ability to regulate body temperature. The blanket provided warmth and comfort. Once I wrapped Parv around the creature, it calmed down significantly. Whiskers chose that moment to phase his massive head to the conference room wall, resting it gently on Jake's shoulder. The reality distortions around the creature's form were minimal now, barely noticeable compared to the chaotic energy patterns from 3 days ago. Several experts instinctively reached for their emergency beacons, but Jake remained perfectly calm. He scratched behind what might generously be called Whiskers' ears, and the creature produced a sound that could only be described as purring, though it seemed to come from several dimensions simultaneously. He's a juvenile, Jake continued, as if having an interdimensional predator use him as a pillow was completely normal. His species are actually peaceful dimensional travelers. The illegal mining operations on his home world used banned quantum drilling techniques. They accidentally created a dimensional rift that shunted him into our reality. The room erupted in translated exclamations of surprise. The idea that the Void Stalker was essentially a lost child rather than an apex predator changed everything. He's been trying to get home ever since, Jake explained, but our dimensional barriers and quantum sensors confuse his navigation abilities. Every time he tried to phase back to his home dimension, our technology interfered with the process. That's why he destroyed those colonies. He wasn't hunting people. He was trying to disable the technology that was blocking his way home. Dr. Veltar's tentacles trembled as he processed this information, so the attacks, the disappearances... Accidental, Jake confirmed. When Whiskers phases between dimensions, anything too close gets pulled along. The missing colonists weren't eaten. They were accidentally transported to his home dimension. They're probably fine, just very confused. While the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had seen only a monster, the human had recognized a frightened child far from home. The news spread to the galactic communication networks faster than a quantum pulse transmission. Within hours of Jake's successful contact with the Void Stalker, every major news outlet across civilized space was running the story. The headlines varied depending on the species reporting, but they all carried the same impossible message. A human student had befriended the galaxy's most feared predator. On the crystal worlds of the Zephyrian Empire, Data streams pulsed with analytical breakdowns of Jake's methods. Their greatest minds, beings capable of processing information faster than most organic computers, found themselves stumped by the elegant simplicity of his approach. How had their advanced sensors and theoretical models failed where basic human empathy had succeeded? The HFY military command centers buzzed with heated debates. Generals who had spent centuries perfecting combat strategies against unknown threats were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the best weapon was no weapon at all. Admiral Korvax found himself reassigning entire tactical divisions to study what the humans call peaceful first contact protocols. But nowhere was the impact more profound than at the Galactic Academy itself. Professor Veltar had barely finished compiling his preliminary notes when his communication device started chiming with incoming calls from research institutions across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to understand the human method of xenobiology. Within 2 weeks, Jake found himself reluctantly famous. His simple student quarters were relocated to a more secure section of the station after the 15th delegation of alien dignitaries arrived requesting meetings. Representatives from species he'd never heard of wanted to study his techniques, analyze his thought processes, and somehow bottle whatever made humans so uniquely suited for interspecies communication. "I keep telling them there's no secret formula," Jake complained to Whiskers during one of their daily walks through the station corridors. The massive creature had learned to compress his dimensional form enough to navigate the hallways without causing too much spatial distortion, though crew members still gave them a wide berth. Whiskers responded with a series of harmonic vibrations that Jake had learned meant contentment. The creature had adapted surprisingly well to life aboard the research station. The engineering department had even modified one of the cargo bays to serve as his personal space, complete with dimensional stabilizers that allowed him to phase freely without affecting the station systems. Dr. Veltar's research paper took 3 months to complete, mainly because he kept having to revise his conclusions as new data came in. The final document, titled The Human Approach to Xenobiology, Emotional Integration over Technological Analysis, became required reading at every major academic institution in the galaxy. The paper's central thesis challenged thousands of years of established scientific doctrine. Where traditional xenobiology relied on technological analysis and theoretical frameworks, humans approached unknown species with what Veltar termed intuitive empathy. They didn't try to understand alien behavior through complex mathematical models. Instead, they recognized universal emotional patterns that transcended species barriers. The implications were staggering. Entire departments of xenobiology had to be restructured. Military first contact protocols were completely rewritten. The Galactic Academy's curriculum expanded to include mandatory courses on human integration techniques, with Jake reluctantly assigned as the primary instructor. His first lecture hall was packed beyond capacity. Students from dozens of species crowded into seats designed for half their number. The crystalline Zephyrians had to be accommodated with special light-refracting platforms. The Throx students required reinforced seating. Even some of the gaseous cloud beings from the nebula colonies had sent representatives. Jake stood at the podium, feeling completely out of his element. Behind him, Whiskers dozed intently in a specially designed alcove, his presence serving as living proof that the impossible was actually quite simple. "Look, I'm not sure what everyone's expecting here," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "There's no magic formula for communicating with alien species. I just treat every new creature like I would any animal back on Earth." A Zephyrian student's crystalline form pulsed rapidly with what Jake had learned was excitement. But surely there must be specific protocols, mathematical frameworks for predicting behavioral patterns? Jake scratched his head, glancing back at Whiskers, who had opened one massive interdimensional eye to observe the proceedings. "Honestly, I just asked myself what I would want if I were lost and scared. Usually the answer is food, warmth, and someone who won't hurt me." The room fell silent. Here was the galaxy's most celebrated xenobiologist, the human who had solved the Void Stalker crisis, and his methodology could be summed up in a single sentence. "If it's aggressive, it's probably scared," Jake continued, warming to his theme despite his discomfort with public speaking. "If it's scared, it needs patience, not plasma rifles. Everything else is just details. Admiral Corvex, sitting in the back row in a specially reinforced chair, raised one of his forearms. But what about creatures that show no recognizable emotional patterns? Species that operate on completely alien psychological frameworks? Jake considered this for a moment, then pointed to Whiskers. 3 months ago, everyone thought he was a mindless killing machine. Turns out he was just homesick. Sometimes what looks alien is actually universal. The semester progressed, and Jake's simple approach began yielding remarkable results. Students who had previously failed standard first contact simulations were successfully communicating with species that had been considered impossible to reach. The Academy's success rate in peaceful first contact scenarios improved by over 300%. Meanwhile, Whiskers had become something of a celebrity himself. His species, the Void Dancers, had finally established formal contact with the galactic community. They arrived through carefully controlled dimensional portals. Their reality warping forms, stabilized by the same techniques Jake had accidentally discovered during his first contact with Whiskers. The Void Dancers' ambassador, a being called Harmony Weaver, expressed their species' gratitude in terms that left most translators struggling. The small, soft ones who see with their hearts was the closest approximation, referring to humanity's unique ability to recognize emotional patterns across dimensional barriers. As Jake prepared for his next assignment, a routine survey mission to a newly discovered world, Professor Veltar approached with his usual mixture of scientific curiosity and barely concealed amazement. Mr. Thompson, your methods have fundamentally altered how we approach xenobiology. You've changed the course of galactic civilization. How does that make you feel? Jake reached up to scratch behind Whisker's dimensional appendages, eliciting the creature's characteristic multidimensional purr. Honestly, Professor, I just did what felt right. Treat everything like you would want to be treated.